of the Arts with another wonderful guest, and that's Elena Schütz. Elena Schütz is actually UDK's finest, you could say, former UDK alumni and founding member of something fantastic, together with Leonard Streich and Julian Schubert. I think you all met here at the UDK, no? Yeah, so this is really an alumni crew that started here. So it's even more beautiful to have you back here and maybe also reflect with us and the students about your time here at the university. And you immediately started. You studied architecture here, and right off your studies, or kind of you ended your studies with creating a manifesto, and that was now 14 years ago. 2010. And I think that's how I first became aware of your work. Because at the time I was kind of researching a manifestos, and I kind of thought the boldness of kind of 3 young architects that have never worked to start with a proper manifesto, I think was a very powerful move. And the content and the style and I don't know, the positioning of it really impressed me, and still does to this day. To many others, I mean, you may be known for the amazing work you did for the German Pavilion in 2016 by punching basically a huge hole into the walls. And you've been involved in a lot of projects that kind of, at least from my perspective, cross between architecture, installation work, exhibition design. There's even a whole strand of kind of graphic design that you've been working with, and always with a great sense of style. And really nice people too. I think that's kind of, you can also tell by that good work and good people can very often go hand in hand. And you've guys been involved in teaching for a long time. I don't know for how long, but it seems forever. You were at the ETH, working with Mark Angeli, and right now you're spread in different positions. One, Julian, together with Ludwig Engel, they took over a master program, the Space Department at the Sandberg Institute, where I was actually teaching before I went to the UDK. So there's a lot of overlaps and connections, but a long story short, Elena, thank you so much for being here, and a warm applause to our guest tonight.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks for having me. And also thank you so much for being here and taking your time to listen to what I might be able to contribute. Yeah, actually this thing about us studying at UDK and starting our office right away, that was a particular situation. At least it felt like that for us, because it was like when we graduated, it was pretty much at the peak of the financial crisis, or the worldwide crisis, and that also did have an influence on how we then framed our diploma thesis project, but also it had an influence on how we then proceeded, and starting an office right away was also related to that. We kind of perceived our position starting an office at that moment, or we used to call it, we feel like we're crisis natives, like you speak about like digital natives. Because our office was born in this critical situation, and we never knew anything else. But we also, we perceived that actually as a benefit, as a good thing, because we obviously did not, like other offices, especially architectural offices, get used to another situation that some people might call normal, and then kind of run into a crisis. But basically this was all we knew, and we could also find ways of dealing with it. And one of that was starting off with the manifesto, and also starting our office right away. Partially for the simple reason that nobody would employ an architect back in those days, but everybody would just let their people go. Actually, the graph that I have on the screen right now, it's not part of my presentation. It's literally just a background that I like to put in front, or in the background of presentations in general. And it's obviously nothing new. We all know these graphs that depict the Earth overshoot. But I think it's just always a good starting point, or a good thing to put whatever we talk about into relation. Yeah, but actually another kind of related graphic. So I was wondering how I can maybe tell you how I feel right now, or how we as an office feel, and from what position we kind of act these days. And actually I always come back to this graphic here, which is CO2 emissions, all CO2 emissions. And then in red you see the CO2 emissions caused by flights, all kinds of flights, commercial, but also goods. But it's just like, to me, very striking how flights, and everybody's talking about how we have to change our lifestyles and we have to minimize the amounts of flights that we're taking. And then if you compare that number that is so much discussed and so much in our consciousness, if you compare it with just the emissions that are caused by the use of concrete, which is just a part of the building industry, and by that also related to the industry that we as architects are working in, it's very striking how much the building industry and architecture is contributing to that other crisis that we are in. And I think that is something that, it's kind of on our shoulders, and I feel it pretty much all the time. That's the one thing. And then maybe the other thing is another very simple fact. What this graph is supposed to present is how much fuel you use when you're driving in a car. And both graphs are actually showing the same car and the same the fuel consumption of the same car, and the only difference between the two is how you operate the car, how you use it, how fast you drive, literally. So it's basically driving a car for 100 kilometers, either rather slow, 100 kilometers per hour, and you're using a certain amount of fuel, or rather fast, 160 kilometers per hour. So the one person that's using the car the slower way, or the way on the left, is actually arriving after an hour, while the other person is arriving after 1.5 hours, which is a rather small difference, but it does make a really big difference. So on the one hand, this big complex problem that seems to be unsolvable, and then on the other hand, something that is, that seems so simple. It's really just about, we can act within all of this, and we can make a rather substantial change with just so little. It's not about, we don't have to design, we do, but it's not about designing more efficient technologies or buying a new car. It's really just a small decision about how we use things. And that, on the one hand, for me, builds a nice counterpart to that other one, but it's also something that we are embracing in the way that we're doing architecture, the way that we're working with space, because we do believe that there is a big potential in everything in architecture that is not about the actual act of building something. So we do think that we can do a lot by just concentrating more on how we use things and how we program things, or how we reprogram things, or how the rules that we are giving ourselves, or just the habits that we have, or that we introduce, just the ways of lives that are happening within these built structures that are rather rigid and expensive and complicated to change and also quite slow, while there is very fast changes that we can make by the way that we use things. And I do think that it's quite interesting, especially for architects, to think about these things and work with these, because as architects, I think we do have quite an expertise on space and program and functions and how we could facilitate these things, but we're not necessarily expected. And that also leads to us not, like, I would say, being rarely asked for these things. So I think there is an interesting potential in changing this perception of what architects do and how they operate. And yeah, as Luca said, there was this book that we did still at university, and actually I want to have say something specific about one aspect. So we were like in this situation, like wondering, okay, but there's a crisis and everything seems complicated. At the same time, everything seems very much in flux, and there's an openness. There, like, people are asking questions. People kind of, to some degree, are open to change things that have been like kind of always like that, and nobody questioned them before. So we thought that's a good moment to also ask, how do we want to practice, like if we're now leaving university, we're going to practice for a few decades. How do we want to do that? And that was the main reason why we did the publication, as something for ourselves, as a way to summarize and just like take time to think about these things. And one thing that I think was quite interesting, and one thing that maybe also fits a bit in this series here, is a comment that Markus Miesen did, who's an expert for like participation in space production. And he was talking with us about outsiders and about how powerful the position of an outsider can be. Actually, he did his PhD in London, and he was like looking into politics and into the House of Commons and the House of Representatives, and he identified the so-called crossbench practitioner, who is someone who, I mean, I'm just repeating he would be much better at explaining this, but just roughly, there are these people who are not part of a party, that are also kind of in a way on their own. So they don't have a big structure behind them, and they're sitting there. And he actually said they are the ones that can really initiate change, because they have the freedom, because they can ask and question what seems to be like decided, or what, like, they can really just go the other way. And they are the ones that are often initiating change, and that's where he started, and then transferred this idea also in other fields. So and I think to us that was quite inspiring, and I think that the position of the outsider is a rather interesting and good one, and actually I do see myself quite often in that position when I'm working, and that is due to the fact that I'm also working in fields, like also Lucas quickly said in the introduction, that are not exactly architecture. For example, I'm working a lot with publications, and I'm designing publications, but yeah, I never went to university to learn how to design and make publications, but also working in fashion, or working in exhibition design, which is kind of related to architecture, but I think we are constantly or often like just starting or like entering different fields that are not kind of our home ground. Yeah, maybe. I think this is quite a good picture for that. Actually, these two pictures, they don't mean anything. I just think they're a nice background to talk about exactly that, like kind of bringing you, like why is it interesting to be to work in a position that is where you feel like you're an outsider. This example is us directing a photo shoot for a furniture brand in Helsinki in Finland, and yeah, it seems, when I look at these pictures, I also always have to think of the term that my friend Oana, who I think started this lecture series, likes to use. She says sometimes she refers to a way of acting as non-professional. So I think, I mean, again, I can only roughly quote what she means by that, but it's also about like working between disciplines, or working or not, basically like crossing the boundaries of disciplines, and to what kind of way of action that leads. But of course, it could look a bit strange that we are trying to do the work that you would usually, like if you work on a photo shoot, you usually have assistants, and you should kind of plan things long term. What we did in this photo shoot was very spontaneously deciding that it could be interesting to take a table and put it on this exit of an underground garage, to take a picture in a strange angle. And I mean, eventually we got that picture, and we did it in a rather efficient way, because we didn't need any additional help, and we didn't need any tools or a crane or whatever you would usually use. So there's something about bringing yourself or putting yourself in these situations that where you, on the one hand, don't have this big backup of expertise and experience, like I've done this before, I know how this works. But on the other hand, that's also something that is then not kind of lying on your shoulders and making it heavy, but you can also just try and see. And if it wouldn't work, it doesn't really, it's also not a problem either. So I would like to, but I decided for this lecture not to show these other things that we're doing, but I thought maybe I show something that is more architecture, that is kind of as architecture as it gets for me, because maybe then we can also, it could also be interesting to see how this approach then informs the way that I'm doing architecture, which is the discipline that I studied at university. And I'd like to start with a project that we did in Berlin. I'm gonna show you some pictures. So we were asked to do a plan for an office, like for a firm in the digital field, 150 employees. They were in a 3,500 square meter office space, and they asked us to design their office in a new space that they were going to rent. We got this job through a pitch, so we were making a short proposal, and then we kind of won that, and so then we started working together. These are pictures of the existing office space. It's in a way a very typical office space, like very practical, very efficient. You have all these surfaces that are covering up technical things like data cables, ventilation, all these kinds of things. It's a very typical office environment. When we got to know the client better, we slowly but surely understood or got the impression that this project it's kind of important for this client, but it's also generally maybe an interesting project. And I show you this thing. Because we kind of felt like there's quite a lot of offices that look that way. Like that office was kind of normal in the most obvious sense. And also the client kind of gave us the feeling that what they're looking for to kind of satisfy their employees and kind of also be able to compare with other offices that are working in a similar field. We had the impression that to kind of fulfill this idea and this ambition, you would kind of have to follow a cycle of constant renewal of surfaces, because the kind of environment that they were looking for was one that is one moment very contemporary and it is going to look very much on the forefront, but will also age really quick. And that made us think that it would be great to find, or also quite important to find, an alternative way to approach this. So maybe it could also have kind of a prototypical aspect about it for other offices in the same situation. So yeah, we got the impression that the client was actually in need for something else than just this new office space. So what we did was we proposed, and then eventually also convinced them not to move, because they are actually situated quite centrally in Berlin, Mitte of Friedrichstrasse. They often have to go to the ministries, because they are working also with politics. So we thought they're actually in a great situation. It almost can't get any better. Because we felt like the problems that they are facing are actually lying in somewhere else, we decided that we want to propose to make a study for the client that is a bit wider, and that is also about more generally about how this office could and should work, because we felt like it's not only space-related topics that they're facing. So we proposed to do a study, and it was important for us to make this study an independent project and say, if we make a study and then we present the outcome and we discuss it, and if they are then deciding that they want to do the refurbishment of their office or the new design with someone else, that's perfectly fine. And we did that because we wanted this study to be independent from the building project, and we wanted it also the outcome to be as open as possible. And the client confirmed, and we did the study, which meant that we moved actually into their office space for a month. And I forgot to say, important thing was that we also asked 2 people to join us for this job, Ludwig Engel and Stefan Karsten, futurologist and a consultant, because we also had the feeling that the client wouldn't expect from us as architects a study, but it's rather normal to ask consultants to consult you in a field wider than just architecture. So we did the study, we analyzed the space that they had. We also went to other office spaces around Europe to see what else is being done and what's possible. We also looked a bit into the history of office spaces, which is obviously not a very long history. And we analyzed the space. As I said, the surfaces are quite important in these environments where you have like technical equipment hidden under the floors and above the ceilings. And we also just made a summary of what's already there, like what the office has. So for example, in this drawing, you can see a lot of tables and chairs and cabinets that they already have in their office. And what we ended up with was 10 theses, and these 10 theses were separated in 2 parts. The first 5 theses were completely unrelated to space, and they were like organizational or about the communication within the firm. And the other 5, they were space related, but also these only partially then translated into actual architecture. For example, we proposed a spatial change by minimizing the number of coffee outlets, and they had 8 coffee outlets originally, to just 1, because it was part of the outcome of our study that these encounters that are happening on a daily basis on the way to the coffee machine or on the way in or out are actually really important, especially in a firm that's working in the innovative field, because it's actually quite important that people that did not have a meeting meet just by accident. So this was, for example, a spatial change that did not lead to a physical change to the building, at least not a building change, but there were just like a change in which room is going to be used how. And I'm going to show you, and there were some of these, but I also want to show you one example of an actual architectural intervention that we proposed, which is here. You see 3 offices. This is the original structure of the office. You have 3 office rooms with 1 person inside each, and each person has a work desk and a tiny meeting desk. A little bit simplified, even more simplified, 3 people working here. And we proposed to turn this into what we called a cluster office, which kind of looks like that. And it's, again, there's only things being taken away. There's the separating walls being taken away, which leads to kind of a community of office with 2 working rooms for 2 people each on the outside, and there's 1 extra space in the center that then can be used for a small informal meeting room or a phone booth or a little studio, because they also recorded a lot of videos. You can actually see the same situation now on this plan. There it is, the 2 outer offices, and this room that is kind of dedicated to the people working here, because there's other meeting rooms, of course. On top of this kind of becoming a new constellation that allows for different work situations and also meeting situations, it also increased the density, obviously, from 3 to 4 on the same space. So there was then even more space available on the floor for other things. But this is kind of how we worked. Here on this plan, you see typically, or like, you see all the things that were taken away in yellow and the things that were added in red. And we really tried to minimize these things. Yeah, that maybe another thing. So yeah, when we then realized, okay, the study was kind of accepted, or it was quite well perceived or received by the client. We were then asked to actually make a proposal for the change or for the office renovation, and we did some also kind of design things that were more about like taking things away. But I think generally it's best seen in this picture what we then tried to do. So after we felt like, okay, we changed things about the structure and the organization of the space that helped, there was still this problem about how do people feel about the space. And the general feeling was the space feels so old, and it seems so hard to be kind of innovative and like do something new in a space that seems so outdated. And again, we tried not to kind of get into the cycle of putting a different surface to make it look new that is then feeling like even more outdated in 5 years, and then doing it again and again. So what we then decided to try to do is, instead of changing the surface, changing the way that people that are working there feel about the surface, kind of their relationship to the surface. And that we did by, again, taking something away. So we chose a few spots within this rather big office space where we did take away the ceiling, like you can see on this picture. It's one picture, it just looks like there's two pictures combined. So we took here, for example, we took away the ceiling gladding, and here we didn't. This part is rather untouched. And by doing that, and by kind of also making it quite strong with this clear cut, we basically just made it easier for people to understand that everything here that is that old office environment is really just a surface. And it's nothing more than that. And it doesn't have anything to do with how innovative or not, or how, generally, or how you, going there every day and working, are actually doing. I think when we explained it to the client, we also we did it through the explanation of alienation, and alienation in the sense of the theater by Brecht, who whenever I talk about theories of other people, I feel intimidated. But just very roughly, when you're in the theater and it's becoming really clear that you're in the theater because by some action that somebody's doing, or also by the way that the display on the stage is, and that is on purpose because Brecht actually wants to constantly remind you, hey, you're in the theater. You're not like kind of totally immersed in the play, because actually he wants you to take something along and take something home from the theater. So that's kind of the direction that we were trying to do by basically telling people, hey, it's just an old ceiling system. But it has nothing to do with what we're doing here. So the good thing about this was that, most of the office and the surfaces could then stay the way they were before. So these are pictures that were taken after the renovation. And many areas of the office just stayed the same. Like whenever we did add a wall, we often we did glass walls and we colored them. And we also kind of found it interesting how the way that the colored glass wall is filtering the view, it also kind of changes and also kind of, estranges the existing again, just by kind of dipping it in a different color. Yeah, that's a picture from the renovation. That's another view of that cut. Yeah. Maybe just to summarize, so for us, from an organizational standpoint and how we kind of worked with the client, I feel like by separating the project and proposing a study before, we just gave ourselves space. We gave ourselves space to think in all kinds of directions instead of kind of following the usual path of a project. And I think by also proposing to the client that the study is completely independent from the project, we kind of gave both ourselves but also the client this freedom and this chance to try something without a risk and then move on or not move on. Another project I'd like to show is one that we've been working on for a very long time, and I guess those of you who live in Berlin know this building, so I don't have to talk too much about it. Who knows the building? Good, okay. So ICC in West Berlin, finished, completed in the 80s, and shut down pretty much 10 years ago. Meaning it has only been active for 30 years. This is some publication from when it was built, but as we know it, we can just move on. So in 2014, when the building closed, we became part of an initiative or a team that was making a concept on how we can go on using or reuse the building, and our concept was that of a cultural use, and this became over the last 10 years more and more concrete. So now we're talking about a cultural center with a very diverse, for a very diverse group of users, for the simple fact that it's a very big building, but also for the fact that the more heterogeneous and the more diverse the use of this space or this cultural center is going to be, we believe the more robust and resilient it is going to be, and also the more interesting it is going to be in the future. And yeah, that's especially important, I think, for this kind of building where we have no idea what's going to be interesting and important for us and what is going to excite us in general, but also especially in the cultural field in 20 years. So we have to set up a situation that we can kind of trust on to be, yeah, on the one hand resilient against influences that are endangering it, and this diversity or this like independence, but also we have to set it up in a way that it will always be able to renew itself and also change. Yeah, and for that we came to the conclusion it's important that we have a wide range of users. Yeah, and again for that it's important that we make the right preconditions, and the right preconditions are mainly or to a big part connected to the economy of this building, because if the building becomes exclusive in the way that, which is the most likely thing, that it just becomes too expensive for certain user groups, then it will lose the diversity and will most likely not be interesting in the long run anymore. So from then on, we are basically looking into finding a way of making this building usable and making it also affordable, and both in the way that the money that has to be invested to change it, but more important actually, the money that has to be invested constantly to operate the building. And over the years, also our concept has become more and more clear in this regard. And so roughly now I do like to always like kind of refer to the project as like how to change everything without changing anything. How to come from this to this, but yeah, without changing anything. That is also connected to the fact that the building has a lot, and it has such a big range of spaces that are usable for so many different things and or by so many different people and for so many different ways of use that yeah, we believe everything is already there, and it's just about bringing the spaces together with the users. So we looked at the building closely, as close as possible. It was not always easy to access the building though, but yeah, sometimes it was. But just looking at the space that's available, you can see, for example, this is part of our analysis that we did in the beginning. So, for example, on the left, the red rooms are rooms that have a door that you can close off, which is sometimes makes sense, and in other cases might not, might be better open, like the rooms on the right. Or when you then just look at the sizes of rooms that are available, there is a wide range from like a small artist changing room to like a gigantic hall. Or here, of those spaces with the door, of the closed spaces, you have on the left those spaces that don't have access to direct sunlight or to the outside, while the spaces on the right do, which again is for different purposes, different spaces work best. and just also very specific rooms with very specific technical conditions or spatial conditions. There are even rooms that can transform. So it's just a very rich building. So, and that's why we said, okay, it's really just about finding, like bringing the right space together with the right people. Maybe I want to kind of talk about a few terms to give you an overview on kind of the issues that are, or the things that have to be solved in a project like that. So the building was kind of known to be very expensive to operate and run, and there are some reasons for that. Maybe one of that has to do with the maximum load. So yeah, if you design a building and you have like technical equipment, you always have to scale the technical equipment to the maximum need that might occur. But that, on the other hand, I mean, it's kind of logical, but on the other hand, this leads also to inefficiency. So in this graphic, you see the typical consumption of basically kind of anything, can be water, can also be electricity in a city over the day. And because people have similar ways of life, and similar ways how they structure their days, you have a peak of use of anything. Sometimes in the morning when people are getting up, and then maybe when they take a break around lunch, and then after work, when everybody wants to shower or everybody wants to cook. So that's just a technical problem in general. Because if you then dimension machines and equipment to this maximum, they're actually not running the most efficient way whenever they're, like, basically all of the time. And the building, the ICC, that was originally a Congress center, actually was operating in a very extreme way of usage. Because it was always like there were like 10,000 people in the building during a Congress, and then there was no one for 2 days, and then again, maximum load and pretty much zero. So we thought that actually one of the most powerful ways of how we can very fast and easy change this kind of inefficiency that lies in the way that this building has been used is just changing exactly that usage pattern and making it much more even. And that, again, is quite feasible if you have a very big group of users. So we would pretty much never allow 10,000 people in the building, but we would maybe always, day and night, every day, 365 days per year, have maybe 3,000 people in the building. And really try to manage this number and leave them on a quite even level, because that would then allow to dimension equipments lower and then operate them on a kind of ideal level of efficiency, which again then would make a big change to, first of all, the input the investment that we have to do to build these equipments, but also the way that we operate them. And how can we get there? How can we make this happen? The preconditions are there if you have a large user group that is quite heterogeneous, but then you just have to manage it. We propose to basically do that with a digital system that is kind of like booking, or where you can book rooms, that is renting rooms to different people at different times. And that also offers different cases of usage to different users that are fitting to their individual needs. So, of course, on the one hand, you could, just the way that if you book a train and the ticket prices or a flight and the ticket prices are changing depending on if you're traveling in a moment when everybody wants to travel or not, or if you travel very spontaneously or not, you could book spaces within this building with different properties at different prices depending on when you need to use them. So if you, for example, have a band and you need rehearsal space and you are open to rehearse late at night, you could have this space for much cheaper than somebody who is an art gallery and who has Saturday afternoon as their most important time of the week and who is dependent on always being open and available on Saturdays. And then there could also be a difference between people who always need to use the same space and people who are happy to use whatever space is available quite spontaneously. And then there could also be a difference between people who want their space exclusively and nobody else could enter when they're not using it. And there are people who are happy to share with others and who are flexible and who don't need to leave anything in the spaces. And this again is a quite big range of needs, but also a quite big range of what people can invest to use space. And of course then the price is quite a strong lever to even out these cases and these different uses. This is the heavy machinery that is in the basement of ICC. This is kind of, let's say, part of the problem. Yeah, and just to kind of illustrate, I do believe this works. I do believe that you can run a building much more efficient with much less and partially no technical equipment, like heating, ventilation, cooling. And there's this example of the art university by Lagrange in Nantes that is also to some degree following that principle, where they have lecture spaces that are rather big and that are for a rather small number of students, and just by the fact that they are dimensioned and so big and that they have so naturally a storage of air, they are not relying on technical ventilation, and they basically just open the window after they leave the room. So this would be a zero technical ventilation example. Okay, and maybe one more thing about the ICC project, and that's actually one of the challenges that we are facing. So on the one hand, you think, okay, if you're not doing architecture in the natural, in the most, let's say, traditional sense, you're only making a usage concept, kind of. So it's completely different from architecture or the way that usually you do architecture. But actually, I think it's not. It's quite similar, and I think also there one of the big challenges is to communicate how you approach the project and to communicate how things work, because people are used to, when you invest a lot of money and you make a kind of a new project, then they expect that there's a picture that shows how the project is going to look like. But as I showed you before, our before and after is pretty much like this. Oops. Not very impressive in that sense. But still we need to kind of like give people visions of how this is going to be. And I'm just going to show you some pictures, and then I think it becomes clear what I mean. Because obviously most of the pictures that we're making look pretty much exactly like before, because we're not changing much. So here's just a range of pictures. So for example, with this picture, we wanted to express that, we're not renovating the facade, we just want to clean it. Or here in this picture, you can see how one of these signs that you have in front of the rooms could look like, that allow you to kind of get into the booking system and see the availability of a room in real time. Or this picture that's kind of just showing how the open spaces that are also like often like seen as a problem in this building because there's not so many closed spaces and there's very many and wide and big open spaces. Of course, they can also serve as an exhibition space. Yeah, or also like about the materials. We believe that the existing materials in the building are actually quite beautiful, and they also go well with other things. So I think here it's hard to see what actually the collage is about, but you can see in the back a staircase that is the original, and then we added like this very lightweight structure that could be a backdrop for exhibiting or presenting something, or that could also be kind of a light separation wall. But actually I think this is maybe the most important picture, because then we also to some degree realized maybe it's not the pictures that are the best way of describing the project. We just said at one point, the kind of the atmosphere or the idea of the project is do whatever you want, but take your shoes off. And by that, we, on the one hand, refer to the fact that in your house, at home, it's quite normal that you set the rules. Like when somebody enters a home, it's kind of usual to ask, like, should I take my shoes off or not? Because there's different rules about things like shoes in different households. And we're not used to that in public spaces. But of course we could take our shoes off if we enter a space, if it makes sense. And by saying on the one hand, do whatever you want, but take your shoes off, it's kind of pointing in the direction that, you can set rules, and they are on the one hand, of course, limiting you, but they can also be the key to changing something and to kind of tailoring a space to exactly what you need it to be. Maybe that's a good point also for discussion, because what I want to show you in this search for the right imagery and the right representation for a project like this is really also how, again, we are kind of searching, while we're doing it, we're kind of searching for ways how to best approach a project like this, like the other projects that we do, we've never done before and we've never been involved in. But at the same time, we believe that this is also giving us a good position to work from. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elena. And thank you. I'll start, then you guys can get ready with the questions. First of all, thank you for introducing us to the fine art of hijacking a brief or expanding a brief. The first one she showed about the office, that's really that's the fine art. If you have a brief, to actually change the brief and whatever, you get a task in university and you are smarter than the task. You just hack the brief. So that's a great example. And maybe because this was in many ways very interesting for us to see almost more of a methodology that you apply here. That you from very, let's say, from rather small office to mega structure. And in a way, also your manifesto was also hacking the brief. You're just finishing your graduation, you're already starting a manifesto. So can you elaborate a little bit on this? And by that, two additional kind of add-on questions is your fascination with theses, like a manifesto thesis, even the German Pavilion. So you like to kind of break it down to, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points. To sum it up. And that goes also along with what you showed us here beautifully, this kind of approach of doing first an inventory of whatever the situation is. Let's make first an inventory and see what we can use of this. So maybe, you can elaborate on this.
I think with the thing with the thesis, and it's also a bit we like to make thesis. We also really like to draw things. I think in general we are always looking for a way like as simple as possible and as complicated as necessary to communicate things. And that is quite often can be a drawing, like a kind of a graph or a simplified plan or something. Yeah, but sometimes can also be just a very basic sentence or two. And I think, we do. I mean, generally, I just believe the easier and more accessible things are, that the wider the range is, and the more people and or minds or spaces it can reach. Very simple strategy. Yeah, there's not much more behind that actually. And what was the other thing you asked before, or you said before?
Well, I started with the find out of hijacking
a
brief,
the hijacking.
Which kind of started already at your graduation, almost.
Yeah, no, definitely. But yeah, I'm trying to find a parallel. I mean, definitely it comes from some kind of will or a need, or I feel like I need to do something else, or I need to do something, or it would be best to do something. And then it's just, the fine art is just kind of packaging it right. I mean, in the case of the office renovation, it was really, of course, I think a rather interesting client who, was rather open and kind of following things that we proposed. But we also kind of, I don't know, I guess within like the 2 months that we knew them, by the time that we proposed to do a study, these 2 months basically gave us a chance to get enough insight to kind of be able to then understand what could be interesting for them. And I mean, there it was really, I think we also kind of set it up in a way that it was, also a way for them to, it was not only freedom and on our side, but it was also freedom on their side, right? And
how about then the other thing I was fascinated with, also symbolically, the German Pavilion, you're taking stuff away. Also the office that you showed, these like super minimalist interventions, which you could read them as very humble and also extremely confident. But as an architecture team that you were hired for, you're saying, actually, you know what, we're just taking stuff out of the equation. We're not adding it anymore, which kind of loops back to the first image you showed, that we're actually overproducing anyways. So that's, I guess, the backdrop for that.
Absolutely. No, of course. I mean, it's rather, I think it's very obvious that we have to do everything completely different. We have to do it really fast. This change has to happen really fast. And also in very many ways, the inconvenient truth is that we just have to do less, right? Like, and then on the other side, it can be really interesting and good to do less. And less is not the sad less, but it can also go in all kinds of ways. But I think when you kind of strip everything down, it's that.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, then it's you guys, yeah? So, you studied at the UDK, we at the UDK, you studied architecture, but what did you take from your studies here? Both as in the discipline of architecture and as in studying at the Berlin University of the Arts?
For
the good and for the bad, so to speak.
Okay, bad.
What are the good and the bad
packages
that you took with you?
I was, when I studied here, I actually also studied shortly at ETH Zurich. And the reason for that was that I had kind of FOMO. I felt like, at least back then when I studied, the university wasn't very strong in everything kind of technical. And I felt like, well, I think I need to kind of get some input from that side. I feel like I'm missing out. So I did go to ETH for a semester. And then I came back quite relieved, actually, because it wasn't. Yeah, I think eventually I ended up at ETH going to a lot of like architecture history and even architecture philosophy lectures instead of all the technical stuff, because it was also then it turned out not as interesting as I had thought, and actually the history was great there. And so generally I feel like then I was actually quite fine with the studies here, and I guess what I think was quite good for us or for me was quite a freedom, especially also comparing it to ETH, where there's very little freedom. There's a lot of pressure, like just simple time pressure, that really makes it hard for people to look kind of left and right. No, literally, it was like whenever something at ETH was not mandatory, people wouldn't go. And not because they were not interested, but just they couldn't. They just had a full day every day. And all these events, it was always just the exchange students like us, and it was I also then kind of appreciated the fact that I have much more freedom here at UDK. And of course also the freedom to go to other, mostly workshops. But
what did architecture teach you, if anything?
I think I feel like first of all a rather broad education. Like actually, I think everything that I learned rather specifically was either already outdated or became outdated quite fast. So I think the things that really kind of stuck were more the more general and more broader things that were not very specifically architecture. I think that's part of the character of architecture studies in general, because architecture is a not very focused discipline, right? And a discipline that does have a lot of different aspects about it. That's how I think I felt about it, that it's a rather general education.
True. So I'll keep my second question in my pocket and I give you the chance. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Stanislav, have you been to the Great Repair?
Yes.
I have to repeat this question for the online audience. Stanislav asked if you've been to the exhibition where there was the finissage, I believe, last night, of the Great Repair, which was also before in the German Pavilion.
Yeah, it's an exhibition that talks about the way we build things need to be approached differently. Instead of demolishing and building new, we can repurpose the existing things and work with what's already there. So it made me think about this exhibition because I happened to spend a lot of time with it. And if you remember, there was a house that was bought by a Japanese couple of architects, and it was like an entire house in one Japanese town. And they took out the ceilings.
Yeah.
That was the core transformation of their space. That was made me think about when you showed your first project with the office. So instead of a rather question, I just want to express thank you for approaching architecture in this way. It's important.
Yeah, thanks. I also saw the building. I didn't make that connection, actually, I have to say, when I saw the building. But of course, that was a powerful example of taking something away and changing it quite completely, right?
Yes. 1, 2, yeah. Do you mind if you take it and I don't have to repeat it? No? Okay, never Never mind. Then let me have my fun and yeah, do your thing.
About your proposal for the office, do you think that that your program or your concept asks more cooperation of the employees with the architectural concept than other proposals for an office, like dealing with history, privacy?
So I'll repeat this again for the online audience. This was referring to the first project you showed. And the question was basically if such an approach asks for more involvement and engagement by the employees.
The employees of that office that we worked with. Yes. Yes, I think so. Actually, the manager of that firm at some point asked us that we communicate the changes with the people working in the office, because he felt like, yeah, there were also things that people were not immediately agreeing with, which was the core was that they had to let go of their individual offices, because most people after the refurbishment worked within these like offices of 2 people. Yeah, because he also saw how we kept convincing him about things and about aspects of the project. He also said at some point, can you just present this to everyone? And then we did a presentation or a kind of a colloquium and a workshop day with them in their space and talked about all the changes. And we also, of course, then had the chance to explain why we think that people might be doing better in these different offices. I mean, interestingly, people would always say, I have so much to do, I have this long list of stuff every morning, and I can't get it done if I'm not completely undisturbed. So they also said, like, for us, it's important. The good thing about being in a single office is that you can sit there, you can take a phone call, you're not disturbing anyone, you can take a phone call and at the same time look at your screen. You don't have to go out and take a phone call and then come back and all these things. So they were like, oh, we're not going to be able to work as efficiently if you change the setup for us. So, and we did have, and of course that gave us a chance to, yeah, discuss it. And eventually we convinced people because, yeah, that the change or the benefit that that was created by this different configuration of office was one that was not like looking at this kind of efficiency, like, okay, how well do I get my task list done, but how much can we think ahead? Because this firm was working in like innovation, like always trying to be one step ahead of what's going on in the future. So, and I think then when people understood that and people were like, okay, my list or my me being efficient in like finishing my tasks is actually not the top priority here, then they were also more open to the change. So I think that's quite crucial that in that case we were able to have this interaction and really talk about what's behind this instead of just like, okay, sorry, your office is now like this, deal with it. It was much easier to kind of introduce it that way. And also more effective, I guess.
Very subliminal way of like systemic change within an organization.
Yeah.
That was triggered with that. You were asking, wasn't it?
First of all, thanks a lot. So you really emphasize this point of, kind of renewing, refreshing, repurposing by taking something away rather than adding it or building upon. My question is whether you think that this principle that works for you in an architectural context could also be applied to a bigger context such as like urban planning. And if you think that makes sense, then what would you start by taking out in order to make
That's a nice one. I have to repeat this again.
Question.
The question from the audience was in how far your approach of kind of withdrawal of things then adding on to that you showed here on an architectural level, how this could be applied on an urban scale, and what would be something that you would withdraw? It's a nice question, by the way. Yeah. Everyone can think along, by the way.
Yeah, actually, do you have an idea? So, okay, So yeah, in general, I think, if you're trying to avoid building, and if you're trying to avoid materials, of course, it's the most obvious and maybe the first try that you do. What can we achieve by taking something away? So it's in that sense really just a logical thing, or like just a, there's not much more behind it than that. I think, it's also not like, for example, in the ICC, it's not exactly about taking away, it's basically about leaving as much as possible. But I think what both these strategies have in common, like leaving it or taking something away, that I think for me the most, let's say, universal or general thing about it, because I do think also taking away something very specific, you could say, it's like kind of an aspect, but I think the universal thing about it, and for me the more important thing about it, is shifting the focus from that building action, whatever it is, if it's additive or subtractive, to the way things are used. So I think, actually I couldn't tell you anything that I would take away in the urban context, but I think there's a lot of actually things that are not physical that I would add. Like I think that what I find quite inspiring is about thinking what we can do with the existing spaces, what else we can do, like things that, or areas or spaces that we use for one thing, like a street that is used for cars, or a square that is used for, or a park that's used for recreation. What else can we do? How many more programs can we kind of layer on them? So for me, that's the more general thing than the taking away. But of course, the taking away is something, again, like also very, it's rather quick, comparably quick, I would say. And what it always does is kind of putting things into a new relation. So it's very architectural, almost traditionally architectural in a sense. Without building. I think that's what's fascinating to me. But actually, I have no spontaneous idea what to take away. Do you have one?
I was just like trying to emphasize, also this thing that it seemed to me that you were trying to stress, which was that you're kind of looking for a more efficient architecture within an existing structure. That's how I connect with the first graphs that you showed. And I was wondering, like, how can you apply this principle to our urban space, which is highly inefficient? So, like, what kind of structural element you would start by taking out in order to kind of like maintain the same structure?
I think, for example, in some cases, quite interesting to take away boundaries, or to take away the designated space for, like in a public environment, cars and bicycles and pedestrians, and like kind of create shared zones, which is a practice that's happening, right? I do think that kind of, it does definitely create conflict, but it also has quite a potential. I think in general the conflict is something, that's something completely different, but we've also been occupied with quite a lot in urban design that we call the whole thing together we call inclusive urbanism, and it's an approach to urban design where functions are closer together and more diverse, more different, and also conflicting functions are closer to each other. So I think generally taking away barriers is, I think, quite potentially very powerful thing to do in urban contexts, because through this conflict, I believe it also kind of is a strong insight. So it kind of incites the individual functions to transform and to develop further, which is, again, I think, going in the direction of the necessary transformation of everything.
Sweet. Maybe one more question. Yes, Yamur.
I'm curious about a bit of the before and after of the presentation regarding ICC, or like your part that you have explained us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's such a big project, such a big building, how you got to take part of it, or who commissioned, or what kind of stakeholders were in the process of it, like to begin with or to continue
Yeah.
together, and what's going to happen now, or how we can approach it now.
So, sorry
Yeah.
again for the online audience. How many do we have, by the way, Jakob?
Around 30.
Around 30. So,
Also for the recording.
yeah. And also for the recording, true. So this question by Yamur was related to the ICCC, International Center for Contemporary Culture. Kind of the background, how did this come about? Who were the stakeholders? Who were the people involved in this initiative, which it is? And what is, I guess, the future perspective for this project in particular, no? Or
Yeah.
does it have any grasp on reality or possible future realities?
Yeah, I very much hope so. And we're actually right now at a quite interesting turning point at the project. So originally, we started together with another firm that we sometimes collaborated on with other projects that's also involved in PR and public communication and consultancy in the field of culture. And we together we actually made a first bid. So the city with city-owned properties, there are sometimes kind of processes that are a combination of a bid, meaning like you can actually make an offer, how much you are willing to pay for it, but you're also applying with a concept. So it's a combination of the two, and also a potential decision is being made on the basis of both the concept and the bidding price. So that's actually how we originally got into it, because we made one of these offers, but nothing came out of it. It was just abandoned. And then for a long time nothing happened, and then I think now we're at a point where we were already expecting a new process this year. So last year we were talking about not this year, like the year that just ended. So 2023, there was supposed to be another, hopefully final process in the shape of a public competition, which didn't happen, but most likely it's going to happen this year. So I think we will hear much more about the building in this year, and basically all kinds of constellations of groups, of planners, investors, and all kinds of institutions can actually apply, hopefully this year, to basically buy and run this building. So I think most likely something is going to happen.
And maybe the one question that I had in my pocket, and you can give a really quick answer to that. Something fantastic started in university. Do I remember correctly that you and Julian met on the first day here even or something?
We all met on the first day.
See, you all met on the first day. Amazing, beautiful story. And then you became an office. You graduated now 14 years ago,
yes.
2010. You're still working together. You're partners in life and work. Like, what's the cheat code? How do you make that? how do you make that happen?
Yeah, well, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's a friendship, I guess. You have friends that you are friends with forever, or like for a long time, and it's exciting and never boring. No matter if you have a fight or not. I mean, first of all, I guess it's that, huh? Then I think, we are also, like, our office is definitely transforming, and I think then it's also to some degree luck that we always felt like the same way about a transformation. I think sometimes offices split because people have different visions, right? And I think for us it has always been, I think we always felt in a similar way. Maybe because we've known each other for such a long time, and I think we made a lot of experiences. We traveled a lot together. Also in the context of teaching at ETH Zurich, like we've literally traveled, to many different places together. So we have a lot of same experiences. So I think we just have quite similar views on things. Maybe one thing about how our office, maybe that's also something, when we talked about this, you also said undisciplinary, I remember. For us as an office, there was a quite interesting moment when one day we felt like we were always referred to as a young office. In the beginning, because we were a young office, but then there came a point, maybe I would say 6 to 8 years in, where we felt like, the people still announce us as a young office. Like, what do they mean by that? Like, when will we end? When will it stop? Like, when are we not going to be a young office anymore? And then we tried to understand what's going on, and we felt like it might be a way of people kind of understanding the way that we are. And then we also decided to offer people a different word. And that's when we brought undisciplinary in. And we just wrote, whenever the people were asking about a text, we said undisciplinary. And so I think this thing with young, it kind of implies that, okay, now you just started and you're kind of still searching. You're not established. But it's also pointing to one day you're going to be established. And in architecture, that often also means you're specialized. I think it happens quite automatically. Also maybe due to the fact that architecture is a rather complicated discipline, that you specialize, because it's just hard to know everything and be good at everything if you're really working as architects. I feel like people were by that kind of referring to the fact that we obviously were not established yet. And then we felt like, okay, but maybe we also have to make clearer that that's not where we're going to, that's not where we want to end up. It's not that we're now like this, but we hope that one day we're going to be established and we're going to be a regular office. But for us, this is it. We're happy that way, or we feel like this is the most powerful way of operating that we're operating now. That seems maybe unestablished, maybe due to the fact that we've been doing different work, kind of parallel, and did not kind of decide on one thing that we want to do. And that's actually the one reason why sometimes when we have to hand in a text, we write undisciplinary or undisciplined, depending on the context, to describe the way that we're working.
Okay, sweet. And then the last question that every guest gets here is a final piece of advice to the room.
What?
Yes.
The final piece.
No pressure, but any starting into the game, I'm always thinking there's a lot of things where you maybe would have wished that someone told you that at an earlier point. And so what's that final piece of advice that you would like to share?
Oh my God. I really don't feel like I'm in the position to give advice. But I guess, looking at our decisions and things that worked and things that didn't work, I think I would say if you want to do something, then just do it now, and don't think you first have to do something else, so you can then do that, but just do that right away.
That's a very powerful advice. So do that now. Warm applause for Elena. Something fantastic. Thank you guys for being here on a cold Monday evening. And I see you in 2 weeks for a juxtaposition with, I believe, now I have to check, Camille and Rohe. And next week we have the healing arts here again. So thanks again, and thank you, Elena.
Sehr gerne, danke.